Right now, I want you to all take a moment and imagine that you're sitting inside this plane. Now, next to you are over 200 people, and you're about to spend the next 10 hours of your life packed inside this metal tube to fly halfway across the world. Now, what would happen if someone were to actually sneeze? Well, hopefully not much, but it turns out that there's actually a variety of diseases that could be transmitted within just that one sneeze, including influenza, SARS, and the list goes on and on. And with more than 3 billion passengers traveling in aircraft every year, this can be a serious issue. Let's take a look at some case studies. So there's this person with H1N1 who managed to get on a flight and actually over the course of that flight infect 17 other passengers. And it's not just for H1N1. When we take a look at SARS, we find that there was this one case study that was done in which a passenger flying on a 3-hour flight managed to infect 22 other passengers with the disease. And the biggest issue out of all of this is that actually it's very difficult to figure out whether a passenger has the disease in the first place to prevent them from getting on the plane, because there is this period of latency in which essentially a passenger can have the disease but not exhibit any symptoms. And so I thought, okay, there's these air filters that are already on planes. And it's true that they actually are super efficient. They eliminate up to 99.97% of pathogens. But your air filter is no good if the air doesn't pass through it. And so when we take a look at the traditional cabin as it stands today, what you'll notice is from the top, you've got air coming in from the very top, and as well as from the side of the cabin, indicated in the blue. And you're also able to see the air going out through the bottom of the cabin, indicated by the green arrow. And what's currently happening is that we get this huge mixing pattern that happens inside the airplane. And so when someone breathes out something, that air actually gets passed around in cycles multiple times before it actually has a chance to go out into the air filters for filtration. And so, okay, I thought this was a pretty big problem, and how could we take a look at this sort of issue? And well, first thing that came to mind is, hey, I don't have enough money to go out and rent a plane and do all that sort of testing. But it turns out that there's a better alternative. I could build a computer instead. And in the industry, this is what's known as using computational fluid dynamics software. And with this, we've actually gotten so good that the results that we get from these simulations are several times higher in resolution than what we'd get with actually going out and physically measuring airflow inside a cabin. And so, all right, basically how this works is you start out with some 2D geometry, so like some drawings from Boeing, and then you move through and create these 3D drawings based on these 2D reference drawings. And with that 3D geometry, that virtual representation of the cabin, the passengers sitting inside of it, we're able to take that and then put it through what's known as meshing, in which we discretize and split the entire cabin into these tiny pieces that the computer can understand. And after that, what we're able to do is then tell the computer, hey, this is where the inlet is from the top, from the side, and we have the outlets at the bottom. And now what's left is you throw in some physics, and you watch the computer do the calculation. And usually for each typical case, it costs around a day of work to do. And what we get is essentially this. So let's take a look at the conventional cabin as we have it right now. And you'll notice the middle passenger is sneezing, this big orange blob. And what we have is this mixing airflow pattern that's essentially creating this huge mess. The person sneezes, and it goes all over the place. You've got this huge cross-sectional spreading of disease. As well, we also see this longitudinal spreading of disease across the entire length of the cabin. And when we take a look at the video demonstration over here, so you can get a better idea, here we have the middle passenger sneezing, and you'll notice just those pathogens going everywhere, creating a huge mess. When we take a look at that same thing from the front, you'll notice the two adjacent passengers getting these pathogens all over their faces. It's really disgusting. And when we see that same thing happening longitudinally, you can see really that disease spreading. And so I thought, okay, this is definitely no good. We have to come up with a solution to this. And so I actually went in and tested more than 32 different scenarios, making these tiny tweaks to the cabin so that we're able to change the airflow pattern. And what I finally came up with was actually this. And this is essentially my patent pending what I call a global inlet director. And what it's able to do is that we're actually able to reduce pathogen transmission by about 55 times and improve fresh air inhalation for the passengers by about 190%. Now, how does this one device do it? Well, when we take a look at how that's installed, we actually leverage these existing cabin surfaces that are already in the planes. So you would just take my innovation and you would just install it, put a couple of screws in it, and overnight you're good to go. Great thing about it is we're only making this one piece, which means that it costs less than $1,000 to actually manufacture for the entire cabin. And when we take a look at the improved cabin, the results are astounding. And what we have now is this simple air inlet director installed near the side inlet location, and we're able to completely change the airflow pattern. We're able to instead now create these virtual walls of air that come down in between the passengers to provide every single passenger with their own personalized breathing zone and their own fresh air. And we can see that the middle passenger sneezes again, but this time we're able to directly push that air out for elimination while still maintaining the passenger's thermal comfort. And when we take a look at that from the side, here we go, and we can see that same pathogens now being individually isolated just to that row, and so we're able to immediately push those pathogens out for filtration without having that huge spread of disease that we had before. And for you to better visualize this, again, we have a video demonstration, and you'll notice the same thing, middle passenger sneezes, but this time we're able to isolate those pathogens such that they get eliminated right away without affecting the neighboring passengers. And you can see with this, the two passengers sitting next to the central passenger are virtually breathing no pathogens at all. And we can see that same result from the side. It just immediately eliminated those viruses and bacteria that's being spread. And so this also actually happens to have wonderful implications for air freshness. And in a moment, I'm going to run these two videos side by side, and what you're able to see is actually, what I want you to look for is these red and yellow areas. And those areas are where we get the most fresh air coming directly from the inside, from the air circulation system. And so when we take a look at over here, you'll notice with the improved cabin situation, we're able to do a much better job of pushing that fresh air directly into passengers' breathing zones instead of having them breathe what someone else already breathed out. And we can see that from multiple angles over here. And again, we're able to see those kinds of improvements happen all across the entire cabin. So it doesn't matter if you're a window seat passenger who sneezes or if you're an aisle seat passenger who sneezes. Every single time, this innovation is going to be able to take care of that and provide everyone with a fresher breathing experience. And so that's all great because it's in the computer and stuff, but how do we know that it applies to real life? Well, in addition to doing these statistical analyses and these numerical analyses with any publishable CFD work, what I wanted to do was also take this into the real world. So I constructed a prototype of the cabin, basically a working prototype, using 3D printing. And what we're actually able to see here is that same situation. So we've got the traditional cabin over here, and you're going to be able to see that air coming in through those inlets and creating those swirling airflows pattern that really propagates disease everywhere. And so now that we know that this really works in real life, we can see, again, what would happen if we were to install my innovations at the side inlets. And what we see is exactly as what we predict in the computer, which is we've got these curtains of air coming down, providing every single passenger with their own fresh breathing zone. And again, over here, what we see is that same still image really outlining how effective this innovation is. And really, when we think about the status quo and the situation as it stands right now, there are huge costs. With the SARS outbreak at the very height of it, it cost the world $40 billion. And there's agencies like the World Bank that have estimated that a future flu pandemic can cost the world in excess of $3 trillion with numerous lives lost. And so what's been preventing people from implementing these sorts of solutions? Well, we can take a look at two examples over here that I pulled just from academia. So we've got one person over here who's really set about providing everyone with these personalized breathing zones. So he's decided to come up with a bright idea to essentially have a hose that sticks out of every single passenger's armrest and that just blows air directly into their face. And obviously, that's not very practical, and it's quite ugly as well. And furthermore, you'd have to redo the entire cabin, redo all the seats to be able to implement something like that. And so when we take a look at this idea proposed by a slightly brighter guy, what we see is this person saying, hey, we could use human body heat to help push, maybe to help push that contaminated breathing air up for elimination. And when I actually plugged what he was proposing into my simulations, what we find is that that air column actually, as it rises through the air, actually spreads out, which means that it's not as effective as this guy first thought it would be. And from a more practical standpoint, what we see is that essentially if we have this, you've got the smell of feet blowing everywhere. And really, God forbid if someone were to actually be able to pass gas inside that cabin. And so with a direct comparison between all those different solutions, what we see is traditionally, we had a very high cost of implementing something. We've got to rip the entire cabin apart, spend millions of dollars, tens of thousands of man-hours, and really take the airplane out of service for 1 to 2 months to try to change something. But now with this solution, it costs $5 to make per window section. If you have like 200 windows, only less than $1,000 to make. And what we can do is we can install this right overnight at the gate, and the costs of all of that are already factored in to the airlines. And so really what we have now is a very elegant and simple solution, and we've designed the prototypes and we've procured the materials. And really the next step is to be able to integrate this with the entire aircraft system, put it through this very long and arduous regulatory approval process. But I think it's important because that means that the sooner we're able to implement something like this, the sooner we're able to make a tangible difference in terms of improving people's travel experiences and reducing the next big disease epidemic. So at the end, I really want to tie this all back into the theme of this conference. What's the point? Well, the point here today is not to scare all of you. Yes, aircraft cabin airflow is a very important issue. But the great news is we've got these solutions coming along that might be able to make everything right again. And fundamentally, anything just starts with an idea. You know, for me, it started with hearing about the news of the Ebola outbreak back in December. And from that, you know, it's just being able to put this into action and to be able to take action. And when we do, you don't have to have a PhD to be able to tackle real issues like this. You don't even have to have a university degree. And what we saw with my innovation is that, you know, when I first started, I didn't even know what CFD was. But that's okay because we can learn about all these different theories and the entire process as we move along and doing research. And so I think that as human beings, we have been gifted with the fantastic ability to be able to create and to be able to facilitate change. And when we truly get together and when all of us here in this room and beyond commits to taking action, we can really improve the world for the better. Thank you very much.